Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel from NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. A warm welcome to our NUS Giving webinar series. On behalf of the Development Office, thank you all for joining today's session, Understanding and Supporting Low-Income Families During COVID-19 and its Aftermath. Before we get started, I would like to go over some housekeeping matters. You may like to click on the speaker's view to maximize your enjoyment in today's event. Please keep your video off and microphones muted during the session to prevent any disturbance. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box and we will bring them up during the Q&A session. Please also note that this webinar will be recorded and we will share the video link with you after the event. Today, we are pleased to have with us Prof. Loy Hui Jie, Vice Dean, External Relations and Student Life, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, National University of Singapore. Professor Jin Yong, Founding Director, Center for Family and Population Research and Provost Chair Professor, Department of Sociology, National University of Singapore. Associate Professor Irene Ng, Department of Social Work and Director, Social Service Research Center, National University of Singapore. Dr. Ong Qi Yan, Deputy Director, Research, Social Service Research Center, National University of Singapore. And Ms. Ang Bi Lian, Director General, Social Welfare, Ministry of Social and Family Development. Today's discussion will be on the challenges that low-income families face during these difficult times, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Prof. Loy, our moderator for today.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm happy to see everyone here today. I hope that we'll have a good discussion and we have an outstanding panel today. And the topic today is about understanding and supporting low-income families during COVID-19 and its aftermath. So not just during the pandemic, but also in all the measures that have been rolled out to constrain it, contain it, they also have impact on all these people in Singapore as well. And we're focusing especially on the low-income families in Singapore. So I want to begin by asking our panelists to say a little bit about themselves and their work, because obviously we invited them. We invited the four of you here because you have all been quite involved with studying and helping low-income families in Singapore. So perhaps I can invite Professor Yong to start first.
Thank you, Professor Lloyd, for including me in this very important dialogue about understanding and supporting the low-income families. I've studied to study how poverty affects family back in 1990s when I was in the United States, where I look at how poverty during childhood affects adulthood's outcomes, such as whether they drop out of high school or whether they have a teenage pregnancy and so on. So that's in the United States. After I came to NUS in 2008, I started to work on low-income population issues in Singapore. And most recently, I have been leading a large national study childhood development for Singapore children. And the study is called Singapore Longitudinal Early Development Study, where we look at the impact of children, and a large part of them, a proportion of them are low-income family. Another part of my work is looking at the young adult and youth during this pandemic time, the so-called lockdown generation or the lost generation, where a lot of people could not find jobs and lost their jobs. So those are two big areas that I'm working on now in low-income families in Singapore.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Perhaps we can have Ms. Ang Bi Lian to say something about your work as well.
Oh. So I'm part of public service. So particularly during this period of time, I think one of the main focus is really ensuring that the policies and also the schemes and all the support that government runs is organizing, it's really connected, and also that the help that we want to give, particularly the vulnerable groups, really reach the last mile, which really reaches the vulnerable groups. So for MSF, for example, we focus particularly on the vulnerable groups and of course the low-income families to make sure that they're supported, particularly during this time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ang. Perhaps Irene, you can go next.
Yeah. Thanks, Lloyd, and thanks Development Office for organizing this panel so that we can think together as a NUS community how to meet needs in response to this pandemic. I've been a poverty researcher for 20 years, and before that I was doing youth outreach among low-income youths for about 8 years. I'd say that for for all my adult life, I've been working among low-income families. Currently, my main research project is on in-work poverty among the young. That's a big project with Dr. Ong, who's the next panelist, as well as some other colleagues in NUS. More related to the panel, during this COVID-19 period, I've been leading an initiative to champion universal digital access. We've been documenting and learning from various ground-up initiatives that are providing laptops, internet access, and digital literacy to low-income households, to elderly, and to migrant workers. I'd like to also mention that the research center that Tien and I are part of, the Social Service Research Center, we just completed a 3-part webinar series on the impact of COVID-19. And in this webinar series, we invited not only academics, but practitioners to share from their research on the impact of COVID-19. And it's just been, I take my hat off to the social service practitioners. They are really working doubly hard during this time, but yet they also found time to collect data and learn from these unprecedented times. And I also teach poverty and policy to master's students who are working social workers. So I learned from them a lot. So I look forward to sharing from all these different experiences later on. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ng. And Dr. Ong Chi Yin as well. Yes. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. As Irene has mentioned, so I'm from the Social Service Research Center. So our center focuses on providing insights on the challenges of low-income families, and as well as social service practitioners. So most recently, I'm the lead researcher of the project COVID-19 Social Data Bank. This data bank is a research initiative by us to try to document and provide weekly updates about the challenges faced by people affected by COVID and the challenges faced by the social service social service sector during the CB, the circuit breaker, as well as the post-circuit breaker period. Yeah. So looking forward to sharing more about what we have learned.
Well, since you are in charge of the data bank, I'm probably going to ask you the first question later. But so let me say something about how we're going to structure this discussion. So there are 3 main things that we want to talk about. The first one is the current situation of how COVID-19 is impacting the low-income families, and the second broad theme will be sort of your projection, your prediction about what's going to happen next in terms of further impact in the aftermath as well, right? And then finally, probably after the Q&A, we'll come back to talk about, well, how else can Singapore society, and for that matter, you and I, help these low-income families, right? So let's begin with the first theme, right? So the current situation. Actually, since Dr. Ong, you are in the data bank, maybe you can just give us a sense of how COVID-19 has impacted low-income families, and whether there are any specific challenges that you have been discovering as well.
Yeah, okay. So so just to give a little bit of background about the data bank. So when we came in, it was towards the end of the circuit breaker period, but we managed to capture what was going on pretty much, the build up of the challenges faced by people during the circuit breaker, and then how they recover or how the situation alleviates itself post circuit breaker. So the main challenges during the circuit breaker was the great income uncertainty that people were facing. Suddenly, jobs were lost or were at a standstill, so they couldn't go to work. The businesses were shut down. there was also a lot of anxiety about COVID risk because, it's either I don't have food on the table or I go to work, especially for the essential workers. And this may be despite the fact that they, may be feeling unwell or they are not sure whether they should go to work. There's a lot of choice that they have to make about their preventing COVID versus ensuring there's food on the table. But more importantly, during the circuit breaker period, when everybody was at home because of the restrictions in mobility, there was a huge increase in caregiving needs, which led to family conflicts and violence. Okay, so this was generally how we would describe the challenges faced by families during the circuit breaker period. Of course, with the relaxation of the social distancing measures, now even in our 12 weeks of observations, things have improved in terms of family conflicts and violence. But I'm sure there's a lot of repair, emotional repair that is going on with these families. And income uncertainty remains as a huge challenge for most families.
Yeah, that was great because you are highlighting two very different things, right? So there is the loss of income, and I think that one is a bit more obvious even to bystanders, like myself, for instance. But the other one actually is sometimes not so obvious, right? Yeah, the family conflict. I don't know. I wonder whether Ms. Ang, you have any insight about this, because does MSF, are you noticing the same things?
Oh, so if I may provide the probably a bird's eye view about the whole. So what Yen mentioned is actually a pocket in the whole landscape. I think what is very important is that if you remember, government rolled out the temporary relief fund within a very short period of time. And in fact, if you recall, there were long queues and all that, and then we managed to sort that one out and actually make sure that people don't rush, and the social distancing thing came into place and all that. But really quite marvelously, that temporary relief fund was a great relief, and it was the immediacy of it with very minimal really scrutiny, because we realized that that really lowers anxiety. I think that was one of the key things as well, because we realized everyone, including you and I, we are all in a way taken by anxiety as well. So we wanted to lower that very quickly by putting in a way resources, promise of money in the hands of the vulnerable group. So that one worked out very well. And after we went online and so on. So that one provides really the larger picture. The other important thing, there were many stories, if you go down the ground, that actually was a manifestation of the Singaporean community spirit, because lots of people really went out and reached out to their neighbors and to the community. But the point maybe that is worth really emphasizing at this point is that in fact, actually, you mentioned about food on the table. In fact, MSF and NCSS came in very quickly because we realized we had to organize the food distribution. There was just so much, and they were getting a little bit, in fact, at one stage, a bit stepping on each other's foot. So we actually started to organize them a little bit better so that food distribution can reduce wastage and get to the right people. So those were some of the coordination thing. I would say that what was critical, and we probably did fairly okay compared with many other countries, was the effort we put in coordinating. I don't think there was a lack of help and people wanting to come forward, but people need to be organized a little bit better. So those were some of the other broader picture as well.
Yeah, well, thanks for that helpful background, actually. So I think when we focus on identifying the challenges, we also must remember that they don't just exist in a blank, right? There's a larger context. And the converse, of course, also, is also true. We have this larger context, MSF and all the other agencies and society stepping in, because we do identify needs on the ground as well, right? Professor Yong, I, from your vast experience studying this, I mean, even in other countries as well, I'm wondering whether you want to say something about, the specific challenges that are facing the low-income families in this situation during the pandemic. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost you a little bit. You're asking me, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, sorry. I think I didn't hear you quite well.
Okay.
I think what we have seen, our data, the SG Leads data was collected right before the COVID-19. And so, but we're able to shed some light on how this COVID-19 would have affected different kind of family. Because our survey is a national sample, not just low-income families. We're able to do some comparison between different kind of families. And I think what COVID-19 has done is to magnify and exacerbate some of the inequalities among different kind of families. Because we already talked about the loss of income, and jobs and so on for the low-income families. On the other side, there's families that have not lost any income or jobs and perhaps are saving a lot of money and during this time, and also making some some extra money on the side too, and happy to spend more time with the family. So I think it's important from this national view to understand that there's quite a disparate situation, and that the impact of COVID-19 is quite uneven with different kind of families, and even family members within the same family, there are different uneven impact too. A woman has been much more impacted with all the unpaid labor that were added during this lockdown period of time, and learning at home, home-based learning at home too. Elderlies, they were not able to see families for a long time, and some lived alone that requires a lot more help than others. Young people in particular, the youth, many of them just graduated from school, are not able to find jobs. So it's important, I think, in a bigger picture to understand that COVID-19 have uneven impact on different kind of families, and even within the same family, different kind of impact on men and women and family member of different age. Old people are very different from how affected and so on.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out. This is really important, right? Because one of the things that you have mentioned is, in a way, existing inequalities, existing disparities are also being highlighted and exacerbated as well. That reminds me of Professor Irene Ng's work on, you were talking about digital divide just now as well. So I was wondering whether you have anything to say from that angle as well, regarding what Professor Jin Yong mentioned. Yeah.
Thanks, Lloyd. Can I share something about low-income families before I talk about digital access?
Sure. Yeah,
yeah, I really share Prof. Yong's view about the diversity and the impact. I like to highlight three scenarios. One is what Ms. Ang has mentioned, right? This period, because of the temporary relief fund, and in fact for ComCare beneficiaries who are the ones who are at the bottom, say 10% of the income ladder in Singapore, there has been automatic renewals. So in a way, this is good. They don't have to jump through so much hoops to get the assistance that they've needed. Then there are those groups that did lose their jobs, right? But there's also another group that, through my years of research, that I found happens is that they have been struggling financially all their lives. And whether there's COVID-19 or not, recession or not, they are still struggling. So these are the ones that in one of the webinars, one of the FSCs they shared, these families say actually no difference to them whether there's COVID-19 or not. And I feel that this group actually might be forgotten during COVID-19 because we are channeling a lot of resources to the people who have newly lost their jobs and plunged into financial need now. And so some of the longer term issues that they need help with, which FSCs might have been working with them on previously, now because the workers are so busy handling new cases and all other kinds of cases, those longer term issues are not being addressed.
Yeah.
Not quite so. Because I think what happened was that during the lockdown period, it was very true, everybody was in fact impacted. So I think there was the difficulty of actually visiting families and really giving more intensive close-up, face-to-face kind of support. So it impacted everybody, yeah. But they actually adapted pretty quickly because in some ways they actually started to, and in that sense, it actually is linked to the digitalization, use of actually technology, because in the end they swing very quickly into trying to make sure that they could stay connected with them, whether it's through WhatsApp or Zoom or whatever. But I think what was probably something that was done but could have been done much better was really, of course, access to Wi-Fi, data storage, data, and then for the home-based learning for children, certainly I think we could have done better in terms of giving them more data. Because I mean, when you have so many crammed in the same household, little physical space, trying to have 3-5 laptops, or even if you get them, that was challenging. So I think that one was something of the digital bit which we could have done a lot better. But the outreach was really quite fast, both from the community and from various agencies.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ms. Ang. I guess I'm talking about how, because, you know, there are always limited resources when there are so many more people in need. Just generally, you know, addressing the longer term issues. These are during recessions, usually, or crisis, usually these things are not as much attention paid to.
Yeah. Even when we have the financial resources as a country, sometimes it's also the scarcity of attention, right? Yeah. So even if the money exists, the fact is that our attention are all focused on the most immediate cases that are coming forward. But actually, I do want to hear more about the thing that Irene, you mentioned about the digital thing. So I'm actually quite curious about that. Do you see any how is COVID interacting with digital divide?
Okay, I think we have all read a lot about from the news, right? About suddenly so many families don't have the learning resources. So what I will maybe share is about what we now know from the scramble to provide the digital resources. So for example, the refurbished laptops that have been donated to low-income families, some have already spoiled, you know, and have needed replacement. So when you talk about going forward, how do we have continued access to families, right? And then it was found that some families in rental housing, they don't even have, you know, internet points. So the plug-in was to donate dongles to them. But on the longer term basis, how will such low-income families have internet access? So Bridge the Digital Divide, for example, is experimenting with Beyond Social Service, a void deck space where people can come together to have internet access. Engineering Good is working in Jurong community to try and wire up the whole rental block, you know. And so going forward, if now that we are learning that digital needs is actually needs, no longer a choice or luxury, how do we go forward to make sure that everybody in Singapore will have access digitally? And so we need to look at this as a universal provision and not one-on-one means tested provision. I'll leave it.
I agree with Irene, but I want to add that the digital divide is not just a matter of having access to the hardware. Of course, even before COVID-19, from our study, we found half of the children in the rental unit do not have a computer or a tablet, and about 9% of them do not have a Wi-Fi connection. But what we found out is that they actually spent twice as much time on electronic devices, including TVs, and on smartphone. Everyone has a smartphone, and they're spending twice as much time than the children in other kind of staying in other family housing types. They're also spending more time by themselves. That means without parental guidance and supervision. So you can see that even if they have access to the hardware, they need more guidance and access to good programs and good programs from everywhere. I mean, it could be from the TV, because they spend a lot of time on TV too, and on the phone. There need to be some preloaded programs and softwares for them, and a lot more instructions for parents to spend more time working on the computer or phone or the tablet. So it's not just the hardware itself. just giving them a computer, of course, it's important, but it's definitely not sufficient. I just want to emphasize that.
So wonderful. You all have raised really, you know, what is something that we can perhaps later on pick up again, Prof. Loy, about the call to action. And absolutely, some of these things we really do require people to actually coach, like what we are doing already. I mean, the Civil Generation Office is doing a tremendous work with the older people to close, to not so much, I don't like the term divide, as in is bringing people on board very quickly, some of these technologies. So likewise, for many of these families, we do need to bring in the coaches to make sure that they are connected with even the hardware that is given to them.
Yeah, fantastic. So in fact, the conversation, the conversation is really naturally moving in a certain direction. But before we go any further, can I just ask one quick question? This question came up in the chat. How do the researchers here define a low-income family actually? Can we just make sure that we have this? If you're in the audience, can you please help us by muting yourself so that we conserve bandwidth and everyone can hear each other very clearly. Thank you. Yeah. So can one of you quickly define what we mean by a low-income family in this context?
Sorry, I feel I'm hogging, but can I just say very quickly about digital literacy, and then I'll make a quick definition. I think, and Dr.
I did. You know what? Define first, then you
define first. Okay. So I've tried to do poverty estimates, and to me, bottom 10% is definitely poor. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, my estimate is 12%. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say if I'm about 30% onwards, we can consider low income. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our working definition. Because just someone asked in the chat. I just want to make sure that we have a mental picture of what we're talking about here. Yeah. Yes, Irene, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I can't agree more with what Ms. Ang and Prof. Yung has said, because in our champion earning for universal digital access, we include computers, laptops, internet access, and digital literacy. So in fact, engineering good now, as they're refurbishing, working on the refurbished laptops, and found that some have already spoiled. He says he wants to teach people how to troubleshoot and repair these things themselves. Otherwise, how do we have the technical support? And all those things that Prof. Yung has mentioned, those are the things that various social service agencies are working on. They've become technical support these days, and yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much. So in a way, we're already starting to move towards the second theme already. But Dr. Ong, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. I just wanted to make a quick comment about what is a low-income family, right? So we could have official definition. So I mean, if we use the COMCARE eligibility criteria, it will be 650 per capita income, household income. If we use poverty measures like the ones that Irene studied, then it will be the bottom 12%. But the more general way that the public can help, can maybe understand and relate to the concept of low income is that families without the resources to actually thrive. Okay, so basically that leaves a lot of room for definition of what do you mean by thriving. Okay, so for example, is having no TV a problem? Okay, so I think before COVID, we would think that having a TV, a family who spends money on TV, right, even though they have no money to for savings and etc., we would say that is extravagant. But now that COVID has happened and everybody is stuck at home, we understand that TV has become a basic need. And it's very important for families to thrive, especially when during times where there is, everybody is stuck at home. Okay, so the definition of thriving will change according to context and times. And this is something that we have to bear in mind. Yeah.
That is very helpful actually, because what is needed to thrive really does depend upon the context, right? Yeah. Actually, many of you have started talking about it already, so I really wanted to move the conversation along in that way. And it's also in the chat. So the young people from these families that we're talking about, the so-called low-income families, right? And Professor Yong has also mentioned the impact that the situation is having on young people, right? And then someone in the chat is also asking about, sort of, are we going to face a lost generation? They have done education, they could have gotten a job in a more normal situation, but under the pandemic and its aftermath, things are not looking as good. Curious about what you guys think about this, and do you have any good insights about the young people from these families? Maybe Miss Ang, you want to begin?
I will start with young people as a broader group. And I think what is useful, again, context. All right. So here we are talking about really lifespan for even young people. We are talking about they probably, in fact, I always warn the young people, they really should be planning to live up to almost 90 years old. All right. So we mustn't use this context of maybe 18 months or 24 months. And then, it's actually just a blip in the longer time span. Nevertheless, I think coming back to maybe one or two more specific things like jobs and all that, I think certainly the world is going to be different. The reskilling, new jobs, learning to have, maybe 3 kinds of vocations during one's lifetime or 5, all those becomes relevant in shaping, I think, the future for young people and all that. So I think those are more important things. And we need to take a longer term perspective rather than, in a way, panic over the immediacy. Because otherwise, I think we don't have the long range planning that is so strategic and important to really helping young people to plan. So I think the context of all these things become important. If we are so tied in with just immediacy, I think we could be missing something in the competitiveness we need to have with the world and all that. So I think perspective to me is extremely important, and we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Please.
Perhaps I can jump in. Again, as I said, I've been studying this youth unemployment issues for quite a long time. So before COVID-19, youth unemployment rate is already 3 times higher, 3 to 5 times higher than adult unemployment rate. So this issue with youth and uncertain labor market is not something that was caused only by COVID-19, because of course COVID-19 has made it a lot worse. So for youth, I think during this COVID-19, our Singapore government has done quite well, and that is to put the emphasis in the development of skills, retraining, and mentoringship, which many of us are doing with the young graduates. I think that's a very smart use of the resources, also the skills future. So for young people, they really need to be aware that the labor market has changed and the demand out there of the kind of skills have changed. They need to pay attention to what kind of skill sets they should have. But again, coming back to this short-term solution is not something that that's sufficient. Of course, after COVID-19, after we have the vaccine and things back to more normal, we're still going to have an issue with the youth and young adult struggling with uncertain labor market. And this would affect their ability to transitioning into different stages of their life, such as getting married and becoming a parent or owning a house. These are landmarks that an adult should have, and without a smooth transition into the labor market, these kind of transition into different stage of life will not happen. So it's very important to take a long-term view and not just do things because of COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks for starting on this actually. Someone immediately asked in the chat, what kind of skill sets should young people acquire to prepare themselves better? And I'm just curious as to whether you all have any quick thoughts about that.
If you want immediate answers, I think the best way is actually to link at what the future holds for. It's really in the whole tech industry, cybersecurity, that kind of a world. So that's a very first step. Those are very good. Those are growth industries, but they're not only growth industries. They will come with time, become actually almost essential services. So those are the areas that really young people need to be skilled in. In fact, those who have lost their jobs, I think a lot are moving into that kind of area. It does require a lot of adaptation, because if you have been schooled in a way or socialized into really going to certain kind of professions, this is not going to be really cool. Just to share a very quick story, someone just told me, someone who is really more from the ITE type person, cut long story short, you know, the parent supported person, the person really has broken into the cybersecurity space and actually earns 3-4 times more than the neighbor who is a graduate or whatever. So I think it's really being strategic, but also being open, I think, because I think not everyone thinks that they are really the techie type, cybersecurity type, but you need to give yourself a chance to really just explore.
Yeah.
I think if I can add just a little bit, I completely agree that digital skills, AI, and data science, these things, skills are probably more important than before in the future. But I also think that young people want to be prepared to have a more holistic training, that is, have interdisciplinary kind of training, not just in statistics and computing, but also uh, uh, arts and social sciences and humanities. These kind of things help with emotional intelligence and well-being as well. And many of the universities are encouraging multidisciplinary type of training to prepare for different kind of directions of development in the job market. So I think interdisciplinary type of training is important.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something about low-income youths. Yeah, I agree with all that was said. Part of why we are studying in-work poverty among the young is that we feel we don't really understand this group enough. But some of the things that we are seeing, for example, just aggregate trends, retail jobs are on the decline, right? But lower income, lower earning, even young people tend to be in that kind of services retail jobs. So what kind of jobs are they going to? And in fact, we're learning that for young people, they're not even talking about jobs, they're talking about tasks. They're just doing things to earn money, doing this and doing that, and doing, different things. Nowadays, live streaming of selling things. This is the latest one that I heard when I went to interview one household. So yeah, we're really trying to understand this and seeing how like lower educated young people are thinking about their interaction with the workforce. Yeah. I think Dr. Ong has something else to.
Yeah, so just to loop it back to our topic as well about low-income families, right? And what Irene has mentioned about, how during the circuit breaker period we had to rush in to provide laptops. That suggests that a lot of our families, especially low-income ones, are not digitally trained. Their children are not digitally trained, and yet we are facing this sudden change in the job climate where the focus seems to be on the tech industry. So how can the low-income families benefit from this economic recovery that we are looking forward to? This is going to be a very big question in all our minds, I think. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of questions who are coming in, different kinds of questions. Some of them actually we really partially answered already, and some of them we will come back to because they concern sort of call to action kind of things, all right? But maybe let me ask one question on behalf of someone in the chat. What can we do to sort of understand this group of people better? Are we very confident that we've understood what they're facing so that we can really, best address their situation, especially in a sustainable and optimized way? So that's a very nice question from the floor. Anyone want to say something? I know several of you, in many ways, all four of you research this. You're not just pure practitioners, you're also researchers. So I'm just curious as to what you have to say about this.
I would like to share from my personal experience. So I'm trained as an economist. Okay, so economists are not well known to go out there in the field and talk to people. But the only way to understand how people are feeling, what they are going through, is really to talk to them. We shouldn't see them as an abstract group of people who need help. We should see them as our fellow Singaporeans. Just any fellow human beings who are in a different situation from ours. So it is, if you want to help them, first we have to start by talking to them. In fact, it's not about, it's really not talking to researchers. It should be about talking to them directly. You know, you just need to talk to one person. You will know a lot of things about what it means to be living in poverty. Yeah, much more than talking to us will help.
Yeah, and that's why for me, for every research study that I do, I will make a point to personally be involved in some of the surveys and interviews so that I can get the chance to talk to them. And from my youth outreach days, I still continue to be in touch with the youth that I had worked with, you know, so that I can know what's going on with their lives and understand from their perspective. I think that's very important. And being in the Social Service Research Center, we are constantly reminded of this by the practitioners, you know, don't just sit in your armchair, you know, come down and hear from the community, come and hear from what's going on.
Now they have to say, don't just sit in front of Zoom.
Yes, no, I completely agree with that. I don't think we understand them well enough. After our study, we learned a lot of things we didn't know about before. But I also want to add that I think multiple methods is helpful. Sometimes on the low-income population, the research often focus on small and selective sample size, those who seek help, and left out a comparison group and those who need help but did not seek help. So a national look representative sample is important, but we also have ethnographic study to go out to talk to families in depth at their home. And we have invited these low-income families to come into the lab to do different kind of observation, test of their psychological well-being and all that different. So I just want to say that different methods together and plus rigorous statistical analysis is very important. Often we see more descriptive statistics that don't really get to the real issue of the causal influence of certain factors on people's on how poverty affect people's different kind of well-being. So I think research is very important, and we certainly have not done enough of that.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's many things else about just people and the world that we can always continue to find out, that we always need to find out, right, if we want to be effective in the world. But that's the information gap coming from those who want to help, you know, information about perhaps people who may need help. Someone is actually posing the opposite question as well. There could also be a reverse information gap, right? So, you know, there could be families who need this help, but they have little knowledge, or you know, maybe not even any knowledge about how to get this help because they don't really know where all the schemes are and all that. Is there more that you know, people can do to help bridge the information gap? Maybe I can invite Ms. Ang to say something about that, because I know that you all make a lot of effort to make sure that people know about this, but there's always the possibility that some people are still left.
Yeah. So we don't profess that we can always reach the last person, and that's exactly why ground initiatives, people at the ground, are extremely important. Because I've used this analogy before, which is really quite useful. I think sometimes government and the central or wherever that is planning things is the pump. We really need all the fingers and all that to really do the outreach, to really reach the last person that may require the help, and then to bring the people in. So that connectivity is something that everybody who wants to do something can do. There's always something for somebody who wants to help that you can do. And that's the very first step, to step forward, to be, whether it's a befriender, a volunteer, just trying to build relationships. I think what is useful for me is that research has given us different perspectives of information, data that we can understand better. What I find is a little bit perhaps lacking in some of the understanding that we're trying to develop, and that is really relationships, quality of relationships, sustained relationships. Let me explain to you the theory. Because when you start, let's take a very simple thing of building a relationship with someone, whether it's low income, vulnerable, whatever. That relationship, when it's very strong and you can build that trust element, it actually links the person with a lot more help. It's actually linking people to social networks as well, because the person usually brings social network. And all those are wonderful resources. We can put a lot of help, and we can put, whether it's hardware or whether it's money. But in the end, what makes that significant difference for me, if you look at things holistically and as human beings, it is relationship. So to me, that relationship element is something that is worth studying a lot more, because hidden in those relationship, trusted relationship, is the ability to really, I think, help people in a more sustained way in the longer term. So why do we promote mentoring, for example, for youth and all that? All that has to do with relationships. So to me, relationship is something that we should study a little bit more.
Yeah, so this is actually very interesting. So this is a bit like saying that it's not just about information, as if we can just blast out information and just get it. It's also about how people are related to each other, how they form bonds of mutual support and friendship. That, yeah, and this actually brings up a slightly different question. Someone asked, there's another gap, right? So it's not just about not having this relationship and not having this information. Could there also be stigma in seeking help? And there's also so even someone who knows where to get help may not want to do it because of the fear of stigma. Anyone has any thoughts about this?
I have a slightly different view about this, and I am trained as a social worker also. I think we have whipped this stigma thing a little bit too hard. So to me, I think a lot of the families, okay, there will always be that few, okay, who tell you there is stigma. But for, I think, many of the people, they are already struggling. I think they're looking for that befriender, that relationship, that person who can journey with them, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a professional, whether it is in the case of children, for example, and students, certainly it is the school. You hear the stories, the transformation that happens in young people's life. Very often it relates to a mentor, relates to a teacher, relates to a young adult. So I think that's the piece that we must really see. To me, that's a very powerful resource that we sometimes look at a lot of the hard stuff. We forget about the quality of relationship.
Lloyd,
please.
I'm trying to answer your question from a policy system perspective. It's actually an artifact of a welfare system where we give assistance in a targeted and residual way, so that we have to screen very carefully who will get the resources. So stigma to a large extent is a given in such a system, because you have to be so screening, right, that to get it you have to be really very down and out and really need the help. And so the officers will have to do a lot of screening and ask a lot of probing questions, right? So to let go of some of the stigma, it would mean that as a society we might want to think about how the way we give assistance has to be done differently, right? If we think of it, like just now I mentioned that digital access, but now we need to think about it as universal. If we think of more universal provision, say some kind of a minimum standard that people should have, then people don't have to jump through hoops to get that, right? So it's more like a really macro policy system kind of question. But of course, at the officer level, repeatedly in my research, you hear of low-income families who say, I really don't want to go and apply for assistance already because, the way they talk to me is just horrible. And sometimes it could be just that one officer, So, I mean, Ms. Ang's point about the social work training and all that, and how we train officers, that is important too, so that when someone comes to get help, right, how you position yourself in that relationship with the applicant, that's important too. But larger than that is the policy structure.
Yeah, that's right. So definitely these are things that can all be improved. Yeah, please, Dr. Ong. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to carry on Irene's line of argument, right? So during the circuit breaker period, when there is a huge influx of application for TRF, the Temporary Relief Fund, By the way, this is really ingenious of our government. You know, I mean, we have to first acknowledge that Singapore is doing a lot better than other countries, developed countries in particular, because our government is very supportive, okay, throughout this period. But having said that, during the TRF period, I have heard so many people who were not the usual financial assistance applicants, okay, who refused to apply for TRF because they felt like they are not, you know, they may be caught lazy, you know, they may be deemed as undeserving of help. Okay, so it suggests that there is a stigma that exists among us because we do not understand what it means by living in poverty, and we associate it with asking for help as you know, as having problems. So that delay a lot of help seeking from the non low income families, traditionally low income families, especially that's made worse by reports of people misusing TRF. Okay, so applicants who do not qualify and try to cheat into this cheat the system. Yeah, so these kind of reports actually promote a lot of stigmatization towards people who need help and ask for it. Yeah.
It doesn't promote a lot, lah. But taken that, yeah, you need to balance as a social policy maker. How do you balance that numbers that actually also took advantage of the system? It's the same with the donor. Would the donor, you know, not mind somebody taking advantage of the system? So it's really about balance. But bottom line is, if you do know of those people who have some of these concerns, what is that link to break that stigma or whatever? It's back to my point about relationship, about that trusted person who can be that trusted friend to bring the person on that journey. Having a universal system does not solve that problem. Universal systems do not build relationships, do not build communities. And I think we really have to get back to the essence of building good relationships, contributing, building better communities. I think that's something to think about as well. And research maybe a bit more. I think researchers tend to also have a certain way.
I completely agree with Ms. Ann about the importance of relationship. What I want to say is that relationship does not is affected by a lot of things. One of them is the basic needs of materials and you know, food, housing, financial deprivation. These things create a lot of stress among family members. And when we find out that 1 in 10 of those 1 to 2 room units have more than 7 people living in there, when we find out that, you know, 1/3 of the rental housing units are worrying about not having enough food, and 38% of the rental units cannot make ends meet at the end of the month and need to borrow money from others. These kind of things are real stressors. These are multiple stressors that need to be addressed before we talk about relationship. Of course, relationship, I totally agree, is very important.
So you're right, Prof. Yong, which is the reason why many of you mentioned about, you know, particular, you call them rental housing, particular categories. And that's why we want to target, right? Because then your help can really reach the last mile. I think having a very effective universal system can actually lead to a lot of wastage as well. Okay, which are TRF and some of the other things that Yan mentioned also has shown. So it's about how do we balance back to some of these things. But I think, Prof. Yong, you mentioned something that is very interesting, which I think very often we perhaps have also not given it enough emphasis and thoughts, which is the comparative element. If you look at many of the other countries, there are 4 things that I always mention. One is actually healthcare in Singapore, right? 4 o'clock, if you go to a polyclinic, right, you take a chit, the doctor stays back to see you, you know. I've never seen another part of the world, in any country, that actually provides that kind of service. There's also housing. Of course, you know, we can improve on rental housing, but generally in Singapore, there's housing. Then there's education, which is gender neutral. Our girls are so well educated. you know, and then of course now we are hit a little bit more by jobs, but at one point we were better in terms of our employment rate. So these are very core elements that actually build some of the base for us to continue to work better with vulnerable families. But many of the other countries, the vulnerables are still struggling, even with housing and with many of the other things, including access to even healthcare.
Absolutely, absolutely. But well, Singapore has, you know, there's about 5 to 6% of this population that are in rental housing. It's still not a small number, and that's as an inclusive society, of course, we cannot afford to not pay attention to this vulnerable
definitely
group.
we pay attention.
And
That's why we want to be very targeted.
All these deprivation that I mentioned in our research shows that in rental housing, the primary caregiver of the children have higher depression, and the family conflict is higher, significantly higher. That's the point of these materials are related to relationship and mental well-being.
Yeah, mental well-being.
Yeah. So we have a whole bunch of questions. Actually, we've been sort of touching base with many of these questions as we go along. So let me just highlight relatively small ones in, you know, maybe you'll have the factual, if you have the facts on bigger tips, right? So do we have data about prevalence of debt because of the COVID situation? Whether or not there has been an increase, you know, incidents of families falling into debt, and whether, you know, what has been done to help them to avoid this entrapment? Do we have data about that? Anyone?
Okay, so just
yeah,
just so the data bank does ask about whether the social service users were falling into debt. There are signs. So as it was only a 12 weeks project, right? So just post circuit breaker. So and there was a lot of help that the government was providing at that time. But even with that, we could see like the signs creeping in, you know, like people were delaying paying their bills so that they have more cash on hand. And when you start delaying payment for bills, then of course it builds up, you know, so one bill become two bills and so on and so forth. So there is that kind of trend, but of course the project has ended for now, so we do not have more information about it. But knowing from previous studies, this is an excellent question, because that has a very, very profound impact on individuals. It's not just monetary in terms of difficulty in recovering, but also cognitively, it will cause a lot of mental well-being issues, and you know, like it affects how people make decisions. So they may start to make poor decisions, which to you seems very, you know, it could look like ridiculous even, but that was all because of that background stress that they have in living in poverty and debt. Okay, so we have to remember that that is one of the very key things that we have to start tracking.
Yeah, so in our data, which again, I emphasize this is before COVID-19. So during COVID-19, of course, we expect that things will become even worse. But more than 30% of those in the rental housing did indicate that they were, you know, falling behind in paying the bills. They have to borrow money. And I think about 2 or 3% of the household that did report that they had utility cut off the month before. So there are some indication of that, although our data is before COVID-19. It's just right before COVID-19. So COVID-19 should probably, you will see even a higher percentage of this kind of distress.
Another general question, which is also very interesting. Do we understand the worldview and expectations of the young people from the low-income families in terms of, for instance, the way they face the future, you know, as they get education, you know, training? How do they do we have any good data about that, or are we making assumptions about how they tend to see the world?
We need research.
Yeah, and that's why
we would like to do research on that.
Yeah, so that's why Tien and I and several other colleagues have started on this study of in-work poverty among the young. We're going to track a total of 1,900 young people, and it's comparative, so higher income as well as lower income youths. And in designing the study, we have piloted with young people and really try and understand how they might be looking at their world. And that's why we changed job questions to more earning task questions. And also we do ask about transition from school to work. Yeah. One point that I've been thinking about in this conversation when Ms. Ang emphasized on relationships, which I think is something very, very important. We are trying to understand the young people's networks, how their networks form and cause them to make decisions about jobs, about life, about advancement. Our hypothesis is that lower income or lower educated youth, their networks could be close and closed. So when they think about jobs, they only rely on their friends, their relatives, right? And our government is rolling out all these programs, you know, upgrading, job fairs and they're not accessing these. Quite different from higher educated youth who might be more used to applying jobs online and using loose networks, right, to get jobs and think about advancing. So that's our hypothesis, and we see what plays out.
Yeah. Again, it still goes back to that thing that we keep coming back to, right? The relationships really do matter. They matter at so many different levels. Another small one, I wonder, food insecurity. Is it something that we need to worry about for families and low income families? I mean, I read about this in the news from the US and all that, but in Singapore, maybe not so much the same kind of news, but I'm just curious as to.
Yes. Yeah. I would say yes. Again, this is data before COVID-19, so nothing to do with COVID-19. The rental housing unit, 1/3 of them, I worry about not have enough food on the table. And 14% had actually said that they had to cut children's food because there's not enough money to buy food. Also, it's not just enough food to eat, it's what kind of food they eat. Our data shows that there's large difference among in the nutrition of these children in different kind of housing unit. The small units, rental units, and 3-room units, the children living in these housing, they consume much higher amount of sweetened beverages and oily food, fast food. I think something like 16% of them had instant noodles 3 to 5 times a week, which is quite high, and that compared to other children living in bigger housing units, their eating is very unhealthy. So in terms of food insecurity, I would emphasize definitely, I think we still have an issue of not having enough to eat, but also we need to consider what kind of food they are eating. Yeah.
So if I may come in, because spot on, Prof. There's a piece of transformation work that we're trying to do with many of the food charities at the ground today. We've actually got a whole inventory of the various groups that are doing this work already for a long time at the ground. And the transformation work we're trying to work with these players has to do with actually how do they, or their openness, they might be already aware, some may not be so aware, to transform really to quality and nutritious food. Currently, by the way, there's a lot of wastage. You can see in some households, for example, 3 packets and then they throw. So that's the transformation work we're going to do. Government cannot just step in because these players are already there at the ground for a very long time. So so we like your input. So it's how to transform the players so that they will actually now provide something that is really more needed by these families, because the need is very clear from what you have described. The players are also there, so the transformation work that needs to happen, and that's the piece of work that we intend to do in the next 1 year.
Yeah, there's a lot of food for thought under the pond.
Yes, but of course, those are great efforts. I think should definitely continue and expand. But all of these are also related to the wage, the low wage jobs for parents in the low income families. That's something that we haven't talked about, but I think it's all part of the reason why, you know, there's not enough food, there's not enough money to pay the bills, and so on. So there's a lot of working poor population that we still need to pay attention to in Singapore.
So we have started. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I would like to echo Jean's point about you know, like the impact of low wages on food consumption. Because it is important to remember that it is not because these families are not educated about nutrition that they start eating Maggi meals, they have sweet drinks. Okay, so this is not the right way to think about them. Many of them, you know, because of our this diabetes, right, this war against diabetes nationwide kind of campaign, so many of them are aware of what are nutritious food. But if you think again about their situation, how difficult it is to live in scarcity, worrying about whether there is the next meal, worrying about, you know, whether you will lose your job, what is going to happen to your children, you would think about having Coke or fried chicken. Okay, so even for me, I mean, I'm a vegetarian, but when I'm really stressed out, I think about fried chicken because it is, you know, like the universal kind of comfort food. So that explains a lot why they resort to sweet drinks, fried food that are non-nutritious. There is also the other dimension, which is processed food are fast to prepare. And many of these parents work in shift works, long hours of work. When they come back, they do not have many support like us. You know, they do not have grandparents to take care of the children while they are working. So they have to juggle between working and preparing food for their children. And to do this fast, quick, children don't fuss about food. Give them something they like to eat, fried chicken, you know. So it makes sense like this, okay, the context. So just want to make sure that our audience here do not go away thinking that the way to solve some of these problems like food insecurity or consumption of poor, non-nutritious food is to educate the low educated or the low income population.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a very clear relationship between poverty and obesity. And that is that the low-income families eat a lot of high carb, high fat type of things, which actually is easy to get in large quantity and cheaper.
Yeah.
So they eat less vegetable and fruit and protein type of things. So I totally agree with you that the way we think about this we need to be careful and thinking about this issue.
So there's been a lot of questions coming through, and again I want to emphasize I try as hard as possible to touch base with as many of them as possible, but I'm sure I miss some of them out, and some of them, frankly speaking, to be fair about it, is not something that we can answer in a short panel. In fact, it could have been its own panel actually. Maybe we should organize some other panel to talk about some of these other questions. And definitely there'll be a chance for you to write in, and our panelists can say more in a different occasion as well. But maybe let's use the last 5 to 10 minutes for our final question, which I really wanted to ask you also. There must be members of the audience who are thinking, in fact, they're expressing it in the chat, right? So what else can be done? And maybe let's put it in a different way. What else can we do? All right. In fact, I did not come in thinking about this one particular one, but it turns out that there's a lot of need to sort of understand the situation better, understand people better, understand the situation of the low-income families better, understand their worldview better. So definitely research is a need, and if there are members in the audience who would like to be part of this, want to support this kind of projects, definitely that would be really, really cool and quite important, right? Because sometimes the gap there is partly an information gap, right? But maybe I'll invite the four of you to say something about what you think people in the audience can do, whether it's people who are able to contribute a lot of resources, or people who who have time to volunteer, young people who have time to volunteer, or whatever it is. Your favorite projects. Perhaps Prof, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that research that will be very, very helpful. And of course, resources is always a key ingredient that we lack. In the Center for Family and Population Research, we take a view that family unit is very important. To study poverty issues, you need to situate it in the family unit. So poverty issues are often multiple generation issues that involved always some legacies issues from the last generation. So often children are poor because their parents have lower education or have made some bad decisions during the growing up, or just disadvantaged from many generations before. So you cannot study children's issue in isolation from parents' issues. So when we talked about policy, definitely there needs to be parent-based and children-based issues that both need to be considered. These intergenerational link are very important. And this family network is very important. Often if you have a big, resourceful network that helps children, and that definitely help the young adults getting onto a better jobs and or education and so on. So it's very important to study family as a unit. And it's also very important to look at different life course, not just children, youth, but also older generation, because COVID-19 definitely affect young children, which then in turn affect the older adults, their family member, older adults, and their children, younger children. These are all linked life that needs to be considered carefully together. And I think when we do research and go out there to do for practice social workers too, we need to consider individual, but their family unit, their network, their community as well. And this time, I think we see a lot of community partners coming together to work with the public sectors, and that is very, very encouraging. And so we need to think of how family can work with community, with the government to support individuals together. And in CFPR, we really love to partner with whoever who can support us. Our center is now self-supporting, so we rely a lot on donors, sponsorship to do a lot more work about this.
Yeah, fantastic. So if members of the audience, if that kind of drives you in, we really want to know better. We want to know the situation better. The work by the two different research centers that represented here, right? They could both do with reinforcement and resources and all that. So perhaps I can invite both Irene and Dr. Ong to say something also. What are your favorite projects, and what would you invite people to join up with?
I see. Let me answer this in terms of program response and then personal response. In terms of program response, I've talked about universal digital access. I think this really needs to happen. When we think about digital access, we have to think of it universally. Otherwise, those who are already left behind will be left further behind. Yeah, as we have illustrated through our discussion. Number two, with regard to financial assistance, I'd like to clarify, Ms. Ang, I'm not talking about universal for this. I think there needs to be some targeted response, but I mean, in response to what the question was about, how stigmatizing it is, perhaps there can be some lessons learned from COVID-19 about how we can balance the stigma and the need to screen. For example, in clear-cut cases which definitely need longer term support. Perhaps there can be automatic renewal for a longer time. I think there's quite these things that are being suggested from the ground.
Which we have done,
And the third thing, actually, I'd like to echo what Prof. Yong raised, which is low wages, and not only low wages, poor job conditions. I'm glad that our government, the parliament, have said that now we really have to think about extending the progressive wage model. A lot of times during recession is when we roll back on some of these longer term strategies. And at the beginning of this panel, I've talked about how some of these things may be sidelined. And I think that it's very, very key to now take this opportunity to address, to restructure businesses so that the wages of those service jobs and lower earning jobs be paid better and the job conditions be improved. So how do we respond personally? Number one, assistance is tapering off, so now is the time for donors to come in to stitch it up. At the same time, I hope that people won't add lots of conditions in the assistance, because the low income already have a lot going as it is. Number two, we have lots of ideas of what we want to do, but let's take the lead from the social service professionals. I think they're quite overwhelmed dealing with the real issues, but also handling us with all our ideas. So take the lead from them and do volunteer, right? And when we volunteer, we can really be open to listen to them and not come with our own judgments on what is good or what is bad for them. Thanks.
Dr. Ong, you want to say something as well?
Okay. So my key concern will be how do we move forward from here? The tech industry is where we put our hopes in. But how would our low-income families benefit from this economic recovery will be the key. So, for example, one possible scenario would be that when the vaccine is finally out and travel becomes possible again, in order to stimulate the economy, so that we can all have our bonuses, pay increment, we might be very tempted to let in to hire more foreign workers, because their wages are low and they can help to boost businesses. But when we do that, then we cannot support the wages of our local residents. So our low wage workers will not be paid adequately because they have to compete with foreign workers. So when the time comes, when the situation is more favorable, do think and give some support to this movement that to support the low income workers in Singapore, and how we can, and think collectively how we can help to lift their wages such that they can thrive like the rest of us, very fortunate people who are sitting here, having a conversation. On the individual basis, of course, if you have, if you are well-to-do and you have benefited from the COVID situation, because you have experienced a boom in your businesses, do consider giving more. Like Irene said, donations are drying out. So it will be fantastic if we can keep the momentum going, to support each other. For the rest of us, engaging in this kind of platform to try to understand the plights of other members of our community is very important as well. If you can talk to them, and even talk to your neighbor, and make sure that they have the information, to the correct information if they need help, and encourage them, and not judge anybody, because every one of us may be caught in the same situation if we are, if things don't go well. So let's try not to judge each other's lifestyle, how we spend the money, and we just support each other through difficult times.
Thank you so much. And Miss Ang, of course.
Oh, okay. So maybe the Chinese phrase, 有力出力，有钱出钱. I will add, if I can't say in Mandarin, but if you have talent, give your talent. So if you have resources, give your resources. Resources means money, time, many other things. Resources, not just money alone. But of course, that's very key. And if there are big donors around, small donors, whatever, come forward and help. For those who are keen to volunteer and don't know where to start, my suggestion to you is, if you want to really reach out to low-income families, start with making a contact with social service office. And you are allowed to go in, drop by, ask to see the general manager. All right. The other thing is the MOE Uplift that really focuses on more vulnerable students in school. And MSF with many of these opportunities as well. We are always welcoming of volunteers. So just reach out to us. If you want to, you can even drop me an email. I will personally service your request. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic, right? And I'll also make a pitch for two different things that have been going on in NUS also. One of them is the NUS Student Solidarity Fund, which was started some months ago in the midst of the pandemic, right? So NUS is trying to basically put together a lot of resources to help as many of our students who are in financial need as possible. And even separately from that, even while NUS, the official management is doing that, the student union also got together and did something similar. They created something called the NUS Unity Relief Fund, right? To complement the NUS fund, but to help just to make sure that our students can be given financial assistance as they are needed, right? So so there's a lot going on the ground. So just even within NUS alone, we have these two things. And I also know of other colleagues from other departments who have been putting together laptop programs and all these things have to go on, right? Because the initial round, we are finished with it, but as everybody knows, eventually these laptops are going to spoil. Eventually more will be needed. So anyone who has ideas, who have talent, who have time, who have resources, please don't be shy to contact us. And of course, not just these, and likewise, the earlier things I mentioned also, if you think that where the real value is, where a lot of the value is also in the research, in trying to find out more about how these things work, how these people are like, how they behave, so that we can help them better. And likewise, also to correct the misconceptions that we have about them, right? So I hope that this panel has been really fruitful to all of you, all of us who have been. I learned a lot. I'm not a poverty researcher myself, but I learned a lot just by listening to the four colleagues here. So I want to give them a big round of applause, but I don't want to crowd. I'm scared. I don't know what Zoom will do to us if we all clap now. But let's hand the time back to Rachel. Thank you very much, all four of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel speakers, for your insightful sharing. To our audience, we hope you have enjoyed today's webinar. If you have questions we didn't get to answer, please contact us at the address shown on the screen. We will send you the link to the webinar recording after the event. Your feedback is important to us. Please scan the QR code shown on the screen for a short survey that will just take a few minutes of your time. We will also send you an email link to the survey. Once again, thank you for participating in today's webinar, and we hope to see you again next time.